don't know if my skills are any different than everybody here, but I think it's good that we all spend some time getting to know each other and sharing our experience. When Fraser called me, he asked me to talk about team building. And guess what? There is not any literature on team building. So what you're going to hear today is really my experience. I am now at about 35 cases. Only one failed because she was crazy. And I missed it on intake, so it was my fault. And she fled out of the system. So otherwise, we have had a lot of success. And a lot of the skills that we have, we're translating into building teams. So I have put together a presentation on team building, as Fraser asked. Before we do that, I also want to mention, because you all are doing a training over here, that the statewide council, I'm a board member on that, is having our next statewide conference August 1st and 2nd. It is going to be intensive. We're so excited about it. It's going to be in Orlando. And we've already got our keynote speakers, and there is a call for papers out right now. So the collaborative statewide website has a call for papers. So if you're interested in presenting, the deadline, I believe, is March 15th. So we'd love to see you all at that conference. So as we talk about team building, we wanted to talk about tonight selection. How does this selection process work? How do you build a team? How do you know if your team's been successful or not? What are the problems inherent to these teams? And what are the roles and conflict resolution skills that maybe I can talk with you? I want this to be interactive, so if you have questions, if you have comments or experiences, jump in. The first thing that I thought was important is to ask a question. When people work together to build a house, will the job probably get done faster, take longer to finish, or not get done at all? What's the answer to this? Nope. Now nobody's going to respond. B? C? It's actually all of the above, because it's the team. And it's the synergy within the team or the lack of synergy. It has to do with the experience of the team. It has to do whether you have tools to build the house. So there is not a clear answer. And one of the most important things is recognizing, does a team have to be harmonious to get along? And the answer ultimately is maybe, maybe not. So there's not a clear answer. Because some teams start out in conflict, but they have such a positive outcome and they feel it at the end of the meeting that there's synergy moving forward. So it's not necessarily where you start, but where you end up and whether you walk away feeling better about yourself as that team member. So it is so important to do those debriefs. Do we do debriefs after every meeting? And it has to be real, because where else do mental health professionals and financials get to give attorneys feedback? Where else? We don't. Where else do attorneys get feedback about their performance, their skills, what they're bringing to the table, and what they need to work on? Nowhere. You go into a courtroom and you leave, and you think you did great, and then you get the order and you go, wow. Or you think you really didn't do a good job and you get the order and you go, wow. So you can't really judge your skills all the time. So the collaborative process as a team has this very unique dynamic. We get to talk about the good things and the bad things. Typically the feedback we get is, if we did something really well, we'll tell you to your face. If we didn't like it out in the litigation world, we'll just talk about it behind your back, right? Isn't that true? I mean, really think about it. You don't tell people in a litigation what they didn't do well. So, what makes a team work? When you're productive, you feel satisfied at the end, and the mood after the meeting and that debrief, that's the important part. So what are a couple of the things that you can start thinking about to bind your teams together? How do you get to know each other, and what do you bring to the table? You did it tonight, believe it or not. Having your cocktail hour, doing this training is a great example of getting to know each other. When we first started our group over in Orlando, we didn't know each other. So we came up with this idea, and I'm going to share it with you, and I'm going to give it to Alice. I said I wouldn't walk this way, and I just did. This was an idea. We all have resumes. They're full of stuff. Most of the stuff doesn't matter. But we wanted a real good way to get to know each other. So I'm giving you what we came up with. It is a one-page bio about what we bring to the collaborative team, whether as a neutral or as a friend of the process, what our training is, with our picture on it. So what we did is we bought notebooks, and we all have notebooks of all of the members of the collaborative process. So it's an idea of how to get to know somebody quickly when you have such a large group. I don't think there are enough to go around, but it's an idea, and I want you just to know that we came up with that idea. So that's how you get to know people. You spend time with them, and then you have similar rules or boundaries in your group, and that really comes with your participation agreement. A lot of these are set up in the first meeting in your agreement. We're bound together with common interests, and then we set a direction, and that's our agenda. The agenda, in my opinion, is one of the most important things that the mental health neutral does for the team. It sets expectations, it sets time frames, it becomes clear to the litigants who are in a process that feels out of control where they can go in this process. And then it gives the team time to debrief, so there's a plan in place. Authority, whenever you put a team together, you always need to have an emotionally mature leader. So I don't know about the mental health professionals in this room. I don't always feel mature, but I try to at least act like it. So that's important, that somebody in the room has the maturity to keep us going. The willingness to move towards a difficult situation, a situation or issue that makes us anxious. So your team has to be willing to move into that issue and dig down. A lot of people don't. We'd rather avoid. I had a new team start last week, and there was a big elephant in the room, husbands having an affair, and we could have avoided it. I knew it, everybody knew it, and as we're going through our goals, I finally just said, shall we talk about it now? We've got to move into those anxiety-provoking situations, otherwise it's an impediment as we move the team forward. It puts a crack in the foundation of the team we've put together. And complementary skills and experiences that exceed the individuals in the room. And of course that word is synergy. You want a team that ultimately together is bigger than the parts when you break it apart. Teams support a community that becomes very important of communication. We are teaching in every meeting how to communicate. We're not only teaching each other how to communicate in our professional communications, but we're modeling for the parties how to communicate to each other in a respectful way. It is so important. So you bring your A game, you bring your non-litigation communication to the table. I think that's one of the hardest transitions I've observed in teams. When it gets going a little tough, we flip into using front-loaded negative and aggressive language, and we try to control that way instead of stepping back and remember that we are bound together in a different format. So that becomes very important. Teams provide, and I love this, a very unique social situation for us. I have a team that we just did a signing last week. We've been together a year. Not because it was a difficult, but it was a complex case. They had more money than people should be allowed to have, and more businesses that we had to go through. And they had a parenting issue. They decided to have 5 children. So we had complex and difficult issues to get through. You're going to find people who haven't really bought into the process, so they remove themselves emotionally from the process, and they become outliers, and that becomes the issue. Low motivation to settle cases. A lot of people don't really want to settle their cases, so we have to address motivation. There are a lot of litigants out there who want to be litigants, and they want to be victims, and we have to recognize that. Low motivation goes along with being a victim. Avoidance of issues, that's what I was just talking about. If we have a team member who's going to avoid and be obstructionistic, that's a problem. Competence is low, and I think these are some dynamics I'm going to talk about in a few minutes, but if you have a team together who has low competence in their areas of specialties, your team is going to struggle. Then we have other kinds of issues, attorneys who want to come in and litigate the case in a collaborative. So they want to cut corners. We all think we know where this case is going to get. We've done this a long time, so in our mind we already know where we need to go. So why do we have to follow that 5-step model? So we want to skip over goals. We don't need goals. We don't need a roadmap. Or options, why do we need options? Let's just negotiate. Here's the offer. So you have to identify in your team a mental health neutral, particularly, and your financial neutral, who's going to be strong enough to hold you to sticking in the process. That is essential.
Excuse me.
Yes?
Is this interactive?
Yes.
Okay. Here for you. What if you have a lawyer who says, you know, you've done a lot of collaborative stuff, and I'm going to rely on you. And all of a sudden you see him not asking for full financial disclosure. If you've seen that sort of situation.
I have absolutely, and I was going to talk about it, but I'll jump forward because that's one of the pitfalls. When you have a very experienced attorney and a newbie on the other side, that's an imbalance of power. Often the new attorney is intimidated, they haven't gone through this process, and they become deferential, and they don't do their job. It is the absolute job of the mental health professional to keep it balanced, and the way I balance is it by asking questions, saying if somebody's talking too much, well, let's hear what so-and-so has to say. It's my job to do that balancing. That's my position.
I think it's the other lawyer's job as well, to tell the other lawyer, look, just because we're collaborating and being good doesn't mean you don't have the responsibility to be the lawyer for this client. And you better make sure you cover your rear end. So if we're not making full financial disclosure, you make sure, and this is a real live case that Alice and I have right now, you make sure that you cover your rear end and the teams, because if 10 million is enough to make your client happy, just make sure that the 50 she didn't get doesn't really become a problem.
Right. Okay. I think that's a really good point. How many collaborative lawyers feel confident as the experienced one to say that to the other side?
Oh, yeah. You better, because you are part of the team that created this result.
Right.
So I think as a lawyer, you have a responsibility to make sure the other lawyer is on board and understands his responsibility as a client.
And then we balance that. Oh, Ellen, go ahead.
And I was just going to say, I think it's the financial professional's responsibility to some degree, if we're talking about disclosure, to say, I need these, you know, I need this document, and this document. And, you know, maybe the experienced lawyer needs to be turning to the financial professional too and saying, you know, we need all the disclosure.
Absolutely, absolutely. I agree with you.
It's just not on the lawyer.
Right.
It's been a long time since you've been a newbie, but I'm going to suggest, and I'd like your feedback, for the newbies in the room, isn't one of the most common problems initially lack of trust? And I don't mean lack of trust in the process, but I mean lack of trust in the other team members. Because the newbies are used to litigating, they're not used to trusting the other people in the room to be doing their jobs and trusting themselves to be doing their own jobs.
We are going to talk a lot about trust in just a minute, because that is really the cornerstone that you've hit upon in building these teams and the differential experience that all the team members bring. And I'm going to give you some ideas on how to deal with those things. We meet to set up the meeting a half hour in advance. So we always do a pre-meeting. We go 2 hours in the meeting, and then we have a half-hour debrief. So we address that dynamic on a regular basis. Okay? The art of selection. I think this becomes so paramount to think about these dynamics. You start with the client picking the attorneys. Clients are attracted to certain attorneys for reasons that are unidentified most of the time. So we have these weird picks. They pick you guys. And then, and then what happens? We have the other side picks the other one. Then we have attorney-attorney dynamics. You guys all of a sudden have a dynamic that we have to deal with. And then together, you pick the neutrals, right? So think of all the dynamics we've walked through in order to get this team together, all the kind of unspoken dynamics that are going to impact on this new client. Now, what we like to think about is when you put your teams together, if you have an inexperienced or new professional or lawyer, that you're going to make sure that you get an experienced financial or mental health neutral that will balance exactly what Fraser was talking about. So you balance out your team, lawyers, as you start selecting your neutrals. You want to make sure that's in place. And then you, before you select those neutrals, by the way, should have asked yourself and your clients a lot of questions. The questions are, is this a financial case? Do I need my strength in my financial neutral? Or is this a mental health case? Or is this a parenting case? And you go to your bios and you start thinking about the best fit for the identified issues you've done in your consultation with your client. Because then you're going to have to negotiate with the attorney who's going to fit. So you better be prepared with a couple of names. So you have to think about that balancing act. And then you have to think, where are they emotionally? Are these people that are going to have a lot of offline meetings with the mental health neutral to coach them through it? Are we already talking about people who have shadow advisors, which may be untrained mental health professionals who become advocates? So we need to know that pretty clearly up front, what the skills of your mental health neutral are going to be. That may mean interacting with these therapists out there who really do affect the process. And then what experience do you bring? You have to balance that bringing that new person in to kind of train our community versus making the team work. And a lot of people are real uncomfortable bringing in new members. Once they've worked with a team member a couple of times, we tend to go to it. And there's some research that we're going to talk about that suggests new team members can derail the process. So we'll talk about that in a minute. So what are the needs of the team? Well, you want credibility. You want reliable people. Some of the ways to derail a team is to be tardy to meetings, to cancel meetings at short notice, to say at scheduling when the full team is there, no, I can't cancel X, Y, or Z to be at this meeting when everybody else can. So that communication that this team is not important. And we see that happen. I've seen it happen with financial professionals that I've worked with who are still very much in the litigation mode, so they have lots of subpoenas and lots of trials. So they end up canceling. So I think it is important to set expectations on that first team call. What's your availability to be in this team? And if that person has a trial schedule that's going to keep them out for a period of time, we may need to select new neutrals. So we want to look at availability, because canceling really is sending that message that you're not as important as a team as the other things that I'm doing. We always want to select the most competent person, but that doesn't really necessarily mean the most seasoned person. So you have to balance those two. and then cost. You have to balance what your client has available from the funds that have been identified with the cost of those neutrals. And there's probably a range of costs in here of what people charge. Doesn't mean that they're not all competent, but we all have different fees. So you have to factor that in as you're selecting those team members. And then we go to the comfort of the team. Often we hear that new members are a liability. And I went and looked and found this very interesting study that talked about airline teams. You know, the pilot and the co-pilot in your cabin. And what the data said, that 73% of airline mistakes happen the first day a crew is together. That is very scary. And 44% of that 73 mistakes happen during a crew member's first time out. So the first time a collaborative member joins your team, that's the highest risk. So what does this translate into? Well, why don't they keep teams together on airlines? I was reading this article and I was getting panic stricken. Because it costs too much money. Scheduling. That's what it came down to. They don't like to do that because it costs money. So we know from this particular study that I found that the newbies are more likely to make mistakes. So you have to be ready for that. They're going to need your guidance. But no fear, what is good about newbies? Well, they mix it up. When you get too comfortable in your team and you develop routines in your team, they come in and they say, that's stupid, why are you doing that? They make you think about what you've been doing. They have their own ideas. They have things they want to contribute. So they really do add something to the team. So as you can see, it really is a balance as you put teams together. Practical implications for all of this. Rapport building with the team means we have to have social skills. You may have some team members who lack social skills. I can think of some teams I've been on where I felt like I was the entertainment because the rest of the group was so dull, there was nothing going on. So you really have to think about the skills that people bring to communicate, to engage, to make eye contact, to say something that's intelligent. So those become important dynamics. Team members have different strengths and weaknesses, as we've talked about, and we're looking for that synergy. So when does the team building really start? It starts in that first telephone call, the first team-only professional call. And it's the opportunity for you to get to know each other. I tend to, since I do these now a lot, I'm agenda-driven and I forget some of that, particularly with new people coming on. And what I realized, I had a brand new attorney on a case the other day. I stayed on the phone a half hour afterwards just talking to her, just helping her. She was so scared about what the process was. And so I spent the time to walk through that with her, and she felt much better. And I didn't even know her, believe it or not. So it gave her and I a chance to connect, so she felt like she knew somebody on the team, real new attorney. So it starts with that first call. I always like to say to people, don't assume anything, ask permission. We assume we know what the rules are. We assume we know what the first agenda is going to be. We assume a lot. Ask permission. Am I going to be the one taking notes during the meeting? Who's going to be taking notes during the meetings? Ask the question. Talk about things with the team. Don't take over that team call. The structure of the team. This is how you build the team. You develop the agenda. And you talk about that note-taking. By the way, I've instructed my teams, I didn't ask permission, I did tell them, we're not going to call them minutes anymore. Anybody know why we're not going to call them minutes anymore? Anybody thought about that? I call them notes. There's a psychological issue around minutes. Think about what that could be.
An agreement.
Say that again. That's right. That's exactly right. It's a legalistic term that gives too much importance to discussions. and they can be misinterpreted. So if they're just notes, they're notes of the meeting. I know that sounds subtle, but it has affected a couple of cases. So I said, we're not going to call these anymore. So that's one thing that I talk about in that first team meeting. Another little thing that I found, some teams use binders. Do you guys use binders? The Mental Health Neutral puts a binder together. All your documents go on there. Well, we started doing that. And one team member showed up and put an insert, and it said, Smith v. Smith. It had the little V right on the top of it. So I have this collaborative notebook with the Smith v. Smith on it. I didn't even pay attention to it. I was just doing my collaborative. We do a full team debrief once the agreement is signed. We give the people a chance to talk about us as a team. And one of the parents said, you know, I had to stare at that Smith v. Smith the whole time. I thought this was collaborative. That was really disturbing to me. So we learned something, how subtle the messages can be that we're communicating, and how important that feedback at the end of the process becomes so we can tweak the little things. So, okay? But keep in mind, in that first team meeting, we need to talk about who's going to provide the Kleenex. Where is the Kleenex going to be sitting? I started a new case this week, and we had a debate about where the Kleenex is, because my husband cries all the time. So I wanted him next to me, and I wanted the Kleenex next to me. And we had to change it up and put the attorney, who is the hated person, because he entered a default before the collaborative process, at the end in what looked like a head position, but I wanted him out of contact, eye contact, with the husband, who was crying all the time and directing his anger at him. So you have to be very creative with your dynamics and seating, and that's the first time I've changed it up that way. Usually it's a little bit easier to figure out. And in the end, they shook hands and they made eye contact. It was great, and we went through 2 boxes of Kleenex. I had a recent case where the attorney and the financial neutral got in an argument. Well, it wasn't really an argument. She asked him to do something, and he slammed his hand down and said, I'm not doing another thing for you. Client sitting right there. The next week was me putting them back together because we weren't going to go forward, because he really was very inappropriate in front of the client and undermined that relationship. So he was okay. He took the feedback really well. He apologized to her privately, and then he apologized to the client that he owned responsibility. And we're at the end, we're signing in our next meeting. But that was kind of like a new, oh geez, I hadn't had that one before, because all the financials are so nice usually. They don't get upset. Trust in the process, and this goes to what Joran was saying. This is number 1. Okay, and the trust in the process is really developing in the beginning when you as attorneys sell the process to your client. They are trusting you first and foremost that this process works. The next is establishing the trust with the mental health neutral and the financial separately, because they usually meet with us before we have a full team. So we're taking it in steps by selling the process and gaining their confidence. So we're building. It's like a ladder of trust. I always think of the nest in that stupid movie. This is the nest of trust. Did anybody ever see that with? No. The nest, where I think about women's underwear and it's okay in the therapist office. What movie is that? I don't know. I don't know, but I always think of the nest of trust. This is the nest. We're in the nest. We're in the nest. The third opportunity for trust is in our first group meeting, team meeting of professionals only. We are trusting our professionals to do the right thing, and then again we build on that with our first full team meeting. Caroline? I've had a client fire their attorney in the process but want to stay in the collaborative process. So I helped them identify 3 other attorneys to consult with, to choose to enter back into the process. So that was a new, strange issue. I have a case now where everybody dislikes one of the attorneys, even his client. It's been difficult. I don't like him either. So those are new issues that are very difficult and emotional to handle. I'm pretty direct, so I just want to say shut up, and I really have to control myself. He just talks incessantly. And then this is, I've told you the two members in conflict, but the new thing is I've had 2 cases post-signing come back for specific issues. And it's been amazing. Their divorces are fine, but there have been new issues, and they want to reconvene the team. It's been amazing. So everything that I've talked about today, that's the goal, guys, that they're out there chatting about you guys. They're out there when they've got a problem. Oh, let's go back to the process. Let's reconvene our team to solve our issues. It's been great. Now, the question is, this is all new. So in the last couple of weeks, 2 teams have come back, and we've rewritten our collaborative agreements. We've set out what our goals are. It's great. So it's going to be something you see, but that's really the whole process of trust. And just think about the memories you've created for those parents going out there. You've embedded in their memories that this wasn't such a bad process. So divorce, because of those teams, is now changing. Now I want to go over one thing. I also believe that the signing at the end, with everybody present and going through it together, is one of the most important things for building the team. So don't just say, okay, we're done, and go sign the agreement in your attorney's office. You reconvene that team, and you sign together, and you debrief with those people. You want to know what they're going to go out and say in the community about you and the process. So you're going to learn a lot. I do every time. And I keep tweaking things because of that, and that's what I want for you. I also take the opportunity to debrief my other team members, and I do it in a funny way. Because I tried to figure out how to make this a good process by also identifying the weaknesses. So I do funny gifts for everybody. I do a little comedy thing about each one of them. We just had a new attorney who couldn't get out of his litigation mode, so I was constantly beating him up. So he got a coffee mug that says, "I make a great second impression," and a box of Band-Aids, because I had to beat him up. So we were able to talk about that, but do it in a funny way. So that's just something that I've developed, but it would be great if you guys could develop some of those things too. I think I'm out of time. Thank you, everybody.